I never meant to become that child's father. I only meant to keep her alive until dawn. But God had other plans for both of us. When Jed Mercer found the newborn silent in the snow, he thought saving her would end with fire, milk, and a prayer whispered into the storm. He never imagined it would draw the whole town against him. Whispers calling him unstable, petitions claiming he'd stolen the child, and a wealthy grandfather arriving by train to take her away by blood right. And he certainly didn't foresee the judge stripping her from his arms at dawn, the investigator demanding he find a mother in 3 months or lose the baby forever, or the woman who'd once sworn off marriage stepping forward to offer her name just to keep the child breathing under his roof. Jed believed those were the battles. He hadn't yet seen the barn fire, the forged accusations, or the man lurking in the dark behind it all, waiting for the moment Jed's new family finally let their guard down. And the strangest part? The twist nobody in that town saw coming. The person who would save Jed Mercer's family in the end was the very man who once tried to destroy it. If you're new here, hit subscribe, watch this story all the way through, and comment your city below so I can see how far this tale travels. The baby wasn't crying. That was what stopped Jed Mercer cold in the middle of the storm. Snow whipped sideways across the open stretch, but he barely felt it. All he saw was the basket jammed against a fallen log, its lid half torn, the wind snapping at the blanket inside like it meant to pull the whole thing back into the dark. He dropped to his knees so fast, the crusted snow cut through his trousers. His hands shook as he tore the lid aside. The lantern swung low, and the light caught a face small enough to fit in his palm, white as the drift, lashes frozen, lips parted but silent. Not again. God, not again. He pressed his ear to the tiny chest. Nothing but the storm. He lifted the baby, stiff and weightless, close enough that his breath fogged across her cheek. Still no sound. I can't bury another one, he whispered, voice cracking raw in his throat. He shoved the baby inside his coat, against the heat of his ribs, clutching her like she'd blow away if he loosened his grip even a hair. The wind caved in around him, clawing, howling, but he staggered to his feet and swung up onto the saddle with one arm wrapped tight around the fragile bundle hidden against his chest. "Hold on, little one," he muttered. "Hold on for me." The mare lurched forward, blinded by snow. Jed leaned low over her neck, shielding the baby with his whole body. Ice stung his face until he could taste blood, but he pushed harder, boots braced, reins slack, letting the horse find the way home by instinct older than both of them. The storm screamed. The baby stayed silent. I can't lose this one too. Jed felt his chest seize at the thought. He lowered his chin until it touched the top of the baby's head under his coat, willing warmth into her. He could feel the faintest trace of breath, so faint it made him dizzy with fear. "Stay," he breathed. "Just stay." By the time the cabin appeared as a black smudge through the white, Jed could hardly feel his fingers. He hit the ground running, nearly slipping, bolting for the door. The latch stuck. He rammed it with his shoulder until it flew inward, and he stumbled into the cold, dark room that smelled of ash and emptiness. He kicked the door shut. The wind hammered it again from outside, angry. Jed didn't look up. He tore open the stove, grabbed flint with numbed fingers, scraped hard. Sparks jumped, died. Then one caught and glowed. He bent low, breath shaking, feeding it slivers of pine until the fire licked weakly to life. He unwrapped his coat. The baby lay limp in the crook of his arm, skin chilled, breath so light it barely stirred the cloth at her lips. "Come on," he pleaded. "Come back to me." He heated a tin of milk, tested it on his wrist, then brushed the makeshift nipple against her mouth. No response. His heart thudded painfully. He rubbed her cheek with a rough thumb, then her jaw the way he remembered the midwife had shown him once, long ago. The baby twitched. The faintest suck. Another. "Good girl," he whispered, breath unsteady. "Good girl, don't quit." Wind battered the cabin walls. The fire grew. Heat crawled out across the floorboards, slow but steady. Jed gathered the baby close and began to walk the length of the room, boots heavy on the planks, voice barely more than a rasp. "Oh, come, all ye faithful." The words tasted like a lie. I'm not faithful anymore. But he kept singing anyway. He sat on the narrow bed. Holding her so tight, his arm went numb. He watched her chest rise. Barely. Fall, barely. Rise again. "Lord," he whispered into the shadows, "please don't take this one." Outside, the storm roared like something alive. Inside, a single breath from a newborn girl kept time with a man who had already buried everything once. And Jed Mercer didn't blink. Not this time. The fire had fought its way into the room by dawn, but the warmth hadn't reached the baby's skin. Jed Mercer sat hunched on the edge of the bed, boots planted wide, holding the little girl against his chest, as if the sunrise itself might steal her from him. Her breath fluttered like a scared bird under his palm. He hadn't slept, not a blink. I wouldn't have dared. When her tiny body shivered once, just once, he took it as a sign he didn't have the luxury of waiting. Jed rose stiffly, tucking her tighter inside his coat, and moved through the cabin in quick, sharp motions. He shoved more wood into the stove, slung on his coat, dragged a blanket around her like a cocoon, and stepped into the bitter morning. The storm had blown itself empty, leaving a cold so clean it cut straight to bone. He saddled the mare with one hand. The other never left the baby. "Easy now," he whispered, though he wasn't talking to the horse. "You stay awake for me." The mare stamped, snorted steam. The world was quiet in that dangerous way winter mornings could be. No wind, no bird, no life except the faint, uneven breath against Jed's ribs. He swung into the saddle and, without hesitation, pointed the mare downhill toward town. Snow crushed under her hooves, crisp and loud in the stillness. Jed hunched over to shield the baby from the thin knives of cold. Every few minutes he lowered his ear toward the blanket. Every time he feared the silence had won. The first roofline of Willow Creek appeared through the bare trees just as a gust of wind tried to remind him winter wasn't finished. Jed nudged the mare into the main street, passing shuttered windows and tracks half filled with fresh snow. The baby stirred weakly. He clutched her tighter. The bell above the general store door gave a single sharp clang as Jed shouldered it open. Heat rushed out in a wave, then died when every head in the room turned toward him. Jed ignored the stares. He stepped straight to the counter, coat pressed closed around the bundle. "Need milk, cloth, hot water," he said, voice rough like he'd swallowed gravel. Ruth Hartwell, apron dusted with flour, sleeves rolled to the elbows, looked up from behind the counter. Her face changed the instant she saw the shape under his coat. "Jed, dear Lord." Ruth came around fast, reaching for the blanket. Jed didn't loosen his grip, but he let her look. Her breath caught. "She's freezing." "I know." It came out sharper than he meant. He drew a breath, steadying himself. "Help me." Ruth didn't waste a second. "Annie, bring clean cloths. Sheriff's in the back. Tell him to get out here." She motioned Jed toward the stove in the corner. "Sit. Let's see her properly." Jed knelt by the stove, easing the baby forward. Her face was pale, her tiny hands curled tight as walnut shells. Ruth's fingers moved with the kind of gentleness that came from losing her own once. "She's breathing," Ruth murmured. "Weak, but breathing." A bootstep sounded behind them. Sheriff Amos Rourke, coat open, star glinting, came forward slowly. "Jed," he said, nodding. "You find that little one in the storm?" Jed kept his eyes on the baby. "At the creek bend." "You alone out there?" "Wasn't planning on company." The sheriff huffed a short breath, half a laugh, half worry. "Anybody around? Tracks?" "Just hers," Jed said softly, "and the wind wiped them near clean." That stirred the room. Murmurs rose behind him, women clutching shawls, men whispering about who'd do such a thing, who'd leave a newborn in a storm. Then another voice cut through the noise, smooth, practiced, and cold as the morning. "Sheriff," Silas Klein drawled from beside the crates of grain. "A man living alone in the hills, bringing in a baby that isn't his? That's a matter the council ought to consider." Jed didn't look up, because if he did, if he saw that smug face, he might forget he was holding a child. Ruth straightened first. "Silas Klein, you hush your mouth." Silas smiled without warmth. "Just pointing out what others are thinking. Lone men and infants make poor combinations." Jed felt his jaw lock. "I don't have time for this." He gathered the baby closer and said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Her name's Hope." Silas blinked. The sheriff did too. Ruth's hand froze on the cloth. "Hope?" Jed nodded once, firm. "Hope Mercer." It wasn't a request. It wasn't even logic. It was a claim. A line drawn in snow and blood and whatever was left of his tired heart. A few women near the shelves murmured approval. Someone whispered, "Poor little thing." Others weren't so kind. Silas, especially. "So he's naming her now," Silas said, raising an eyebrow. "That settles nothing. A child needs proper placement, proper documents." "Child needs heat," Jed said flatly, "and milk, and quiet." The sheriff lifted a hand like he meant to keep the peace. "Silas, not now. Jed, Ruth, let me see what I can do about getting Doc Harlan here." Ruth squeezed Jed's arm. "You keep her close to that stove. I'll fetch everything she needs." Jed didn't answer. He couldn't. Hope had let out the faintest sigh, a thread of sound so fragile he nearly folded over it. He lowered his forehead to hers for the briefest second, exhaling warm air across her skin. She stirred. Jed's shoulders sagged in something close to relief. "Thank you. Just thank you." Outside, wind scraped frost across the windows, reminding everyone winter still had claws. Inside, the room full of strangers watched the broken man holding a silent baby, as if something sacred had walked through their door. Jed didn't see them. He saw only her. And as the fire grew, as heat pushed deeper into her tiny body, he understood something he hadn't dared admit since the storm. He would fight anyone, any council, any law, any man, for that faint, stubborn breath against his chest, even if the whole town stood in his way. By late afternoon, the worst of the fear had thinned, but it hadn't left Jed Mercer's bones. Hope slept in short, uneven breaths inside the crook of his arm, while the stove hummed low behind them. The store had quieted, shoppers gone, voices faded, snow muffling everything outside. But Jed stayed kneeling by the heat like a man guarding a fragile flame. Ruth Hartwell folded a fresh square of cotton and handed it over. "You'll need this tonight. And more milk, I'll bring some by." Jed nodded, still watching Hope's chest. "Thank you." Ruth hesitated, her brows drawing slightly. "Jed, let me see the blanket she came in." He stiffened. "Why?" "So I know how cold she was," she said gently. "It might tell me what she's fighting." That sounded harmless enough. Jed unwrapped the outer layer, keeping Hope tucked against him, and handed Ruth the small, frost-damp cloth that had been against the baby's skin since the creek. She held it to the light, turning it slowly. Then she frowned. "This stitching, this isn't prairie work." Sheriff Amos Rourke looked up from the ledger he'd been pretending to review. "Meaning?" Ruth pointed to a seam. "Silk thread, tight needlework. Someone with a proper hand did this, not a ranch wife mending by lamplight." She traced the edge. "And look here. Initials." Jed's back straightened. He hadn't noticed. Ruth pinched the cloth open, revealing faint blue letters, half faded from snow and cold. "E.A." "Could be anything," Amos said, crossing over. "Child's name, mother's name, family mark." Ruth shook her head. "It's not a family mark. It's personal. A woman made this. Someone educated. Someone with money." Jed's throat tightened. Hope stirred restlessly in his arm, as if the moment itself unsettled her. He laid a calming hand on her back. "I don't care whose blood she is." Ruth glanced up at him, reading something in his posture. "Jed, this could mean someone's looking for her. Or someone's trying to hide her," Amos added quietly. The store door swung open then, letting in a slap of cold air and two ranch hands stomping snow off their boots. They greeted Ruth, nodded at Amos, then caught sight of Jed kneeling by the stove with a newborn pressed to his chest. Their expressions shifted, curiosity first, then discomfort, then that flicker of suspicion Jed had seen too many times already today. "Heard you found that babe in the storm," one of the men said. "That true?" Jed didn't answer. Ruth stepped in front of them slightly, hands on her hips. "It's true he saved her life, if that's what you mean." The man shrugged. "Funny thing. Folks say they saw tracks near Jed's ridge yesterday evening, before the blizzard hit." Jed felt the room shrink. "Tracks of what?" "Hard to say, hard to see with the wind." The man exchanged a look with his friend. "Just seems strange is all." Amos cut in, voice low but firm. "This isn't the time for gossip. Jed came straight to town for help. That's what matters." The ranch hands backed off, muttering something about heading to the saloon. The bell chimed behind them as the door closed, but the tension they left stayed hanging like smoke. Ruth folded the cloth and gave it back. "Keep this safe. It might explain everything, or nothing at all." Jed slipped the stitched blanket inside his coat, near Hope's tiny back. He didn't want it away from her. He didn't want anything away from her. Amos lowered his hat, thinking. "Jed, we should file a report. Just a simple one. Foundling child. Unknown identity. That way nobody can say you're hiding things." "Hiding?" Jed snapped before he could stop himself. Hope stirred at the sudden rise in his voice. He softened instantly, rubbing her shoulder. "I'm not hiding anything." "I know." Amos's tone stayed even. "But Silas Klein's already stirring talk downtown. He's saying the council ought to take the baby for proper placement. And you naming her Mercer riled him good." Jed's jaw clenched. "I named her because she needed a name." Ruth touched his arm. "And it was the right thing to do, but it also paints a target on your back." "I've been a target before," Jed muttered. "I just never had someone this small behind me." Amos exhaled. "Let's keep ahead of trouble. You cooperate. You stay transparent. That's how we beat men like Silas." Jed nodded once. "Fine. We file your report." But as he said it, Hope's breath fluttered unevenly again. Jed's attention snapped down to her instantly. Her little fists trembled, her brow pinched. A soft, broken whimper escaped her lips. "Hey now," he murmured, rocking slightly where he knelt. "It's all right, baby girl, I got you." Hope's whimper quieted at the sound of his voice. Ruth's eyes softened. Even Amos, who had seen more winters than most, looked away for a second, throat working. Outside, the wind rose again and rattled the window glass, like a warning tapping against the frame. Jed didn't look up. He held Hope closer and felt the tiny beat of her heart respond to the rhythm of his own. Weak, scared, but there. "She needs stability," Amos said quietly. "Routine, care, warmth. You ready for that, Jed?" Jed didn't answer right away. He didn't need to. The way he tightened his hold on the baby said everything. Finally, he said, "I'll figure out whatever I gotta figure out." Ruth let out a breath. "Then let's start with getting you two home. I'll bring over blankets and soup, and I'll help with the night feedings till the fever breaks." "Thank you," Jed said, voice low. Hope shifted again. Her cheek brushed the inside of his coat. Her breath warmed the cold fabric. It felt like trust, maybe even grace. Ruth gathered her things. Amos wrote the first lines of his report. Snow drifted heavier outside. Jed rose slowly, holding Hope like something worth more than breath itself. He glanced once toward the window, toward the hills where he'd found her. E.A. Someone's initials. Someone's story. Someone's sin. And whoever had left this child out there in the storm. Jed knew he hadn't seen the last of them. Morning came gray and brittle, the kind of light that made everything look colder than it was. Jed Mercer stepped onto the wooden porch of the boarding house with Hope bundled against his chest, her tiny breaths fogging the wool. Ruth Hartwell locked the door behind them, basket in hand, ready to walk him toward the clinic for fresh broth. Snow squeaked under their boots, high, dry, warning of another storm thinking about forming. Silas Klein was already waiting at the corner. He wore that polished smile of his, the one that didn't touch his eyes. He lifted his gloved hand as if greeting old friends. Mercer, Mrs. Hartwell, early start. Jed didn't slow. Hope stirred at the sound of the man's voice, as if some instinct buried in the small body recognized danger. Jed adjusted his coat to shield her more fully. We're just passing through. Of course, Silas said lightly. Though you might want to know I've had concerns brought to me about that child you're carrying. Ruth stepped forward. Concerns from who? Silas shrugged, the very picture of pleasant civility. Neighbors talk. They remember Jed's unfortunate history. Hard to forget such loss. Jed's hand tightened around Hope's back. He wasn't sure if he meant to protect her or himself. Maybe both. Silas leaned slightly closer, dropping his voice. People say a man who's known that kind of grief might not be thinking clearly, might do rash things, like claim a child that isn't his, even hide where she came from. I'm hiding nothing, Jed said quietly. But you named her. Silas gestured toward the bundle. That was bold. Ruth snapped. He named her because she needed a name. Silas's smile thinned. Names carry weight, Mrs. Hartwell. Claims, responsibilities. And the council believes a baby abandoned in the snow deserves placement in a more structured household. One with a mother and father. One without... He flicked a glance at Jed. Unresolved tragedies. Jed's jaw locked. For a split second, he saw the creek again. Saw another small body that hadn't breathed in his arms. A memory he never touched unless forced. Don't you speak of that, he thought, throat burning. Silas continued as if discussing grain prices. I'll be presenting a petition this afternoon. For her safety, of course. Ruth stepped between them fully now, chin lifted. Silas Klein, if you think this baby is safer in your hands than his, you're more deluded than I thought. Jed didn't trust himself to speak. Hope whimpered and squirmed against him, picking up the tension like a wire. Her cheek pressed into his coat. He held her tighter, swaying without realizing he'd started. Silas tipped his hat, unbothered. Just doing my duty. The town will decide. He walked off, boots clicking sharp against the frozen road, each step sounding like a door closing. Ruth exhaled long. He's going to make this ugly. It already is, Jed muttered. They started toward the clinic, but the stairs followed them. People paused at windows. A couple leaned together, whispering behind gloved hands. Someone shut their door fast when Jed looked up. Rumors spread faster than wildfire on the plains. Faster than truth. Much faster than grace. Inside the clinic, warmth met them, along with Dr. Cyrus Hale wiping his hands. He looked tired, but his kindness hadn't worn thin. Let me see her, Jed. Jed shifted Hope carefully. The doctor felt her forehead, checked her breath, listened against her back. Weak, but better. Keep the milk warm, keep her close. She fights hard. Jed nodded. Ruth asked, Do you think she'll pull through? Dr. Hale hesitated. Newborns are fragile, but this one? She's stubborn. That counts for something. Hope fussed softly, rooting for comfort. Jed tucked her back into his coat. She's not going anywhere. The doctor's eyes softened. I believe you. But the language there, believe, hit Jed sideways. It meant something else, too. Others won't. Outside again, the wind had picked up, dragging loose snow across the road like thin veils. Jed and Ruth walked in silence until they reached the general store. Amos Rourke was standing outside, arms crossed, face set like carved oak. He jerked his head toward them. "Silas has 20 signatures already." Ruth swore under her breath. Jed swallowed. "And what does that mean?" "It means he'll try to take the baby today." Amos didn't soften it. "He'll push for temporary custody with the council while they investigate origin. He's spinning a story that the child might have been harmed before you found her." Ruth's eyes flared. "That is a damn lie." "I know," Amos said, "but lies don't need spine when people are scared." The wind surged again, rattling the sign above them. Hope whimpered at the noise. Jed bent his head, murmuring, "It's all right, little one. I'm here. I'm right here." Amos tapped his notebook. "I filed your report. It helps, but it's not enough. Silas wants blood." He lowered his voice. "Jed, you need allies, and fast." Jed lifted his eyes. His voice was steady, but only barely. "Then tell me what to do." Amos studied him for a moment, then nodded. "First thing, don't let Silas corner you alone. He's building a case in whispers. You counter it in daylight." Ruth's hand hovered near Jed's arm. "We'll stand with you." Jed breathed in slow. Snow swirled around them like ash. In his coat, hope pressed closer, warm and impossibly small. He had no land worth stealing, no money worth envying, no influence worth fearing. But he had a child now. A child someone had thrown away, and another someone was trying to claim for all the wrong reasons. He looked at Amos. "Whatever comes next, I won't back down." A gust of wind slammed against the storefront, and the old, wooden sign creaked above their heads. Amos nodded once. "Good, because dawn won't be the only thing coming for you." The letter arrived on the noon stagecoach, wrapped in waxed paper, and carried like it weighed more than iron. Amos Rourke met Jed Mercer at the edge of the boardwalk, eyes narrowed against the swirling grit of snow that hadn't decided whether it meant to become a true storm or just a warning. "Jed," the sheriff said quietly, "we need to step inside." Jed shifted hope higher against his chest. The baby had warmed enough these past hours to fuss now and then, a sound that still rattled him with equal parts relief and fear. He followed Amos into the quiet of the telegraph office, where the fire snapped low and the operator pretended not to listen. Amos held out the letter. "Came from a law office down south. For you." Jed didn't take it at first. His fingers hovered, stiff. "Why me?" "You're the man who found her," Amos said. "And the one caring for her. That makes you the point of contact." Ruth Hartwell slipped in through the door, snow dusting her shawl. She'd followed them without asking permission, because that was Ruth. "What's going on?" Amos nodded toward the letter. He should read it. Jed finally broke the wax. The paper crackled like dry leaves. He scanned the words once, then again, slower, as if reading through water. Ruth stepped closer. "Jed?" He swallowed. Hard. "She's dead." The room stilled. Even the telegraph keys fell silent, as if the wires themselves had paused to listen. Ruth whispered, "Who?" "The baby's mother." Jed's voice grated low in his throat. "Died of fever. Before she passed, she told the lawyer she left her child near Frost Creek, wrapped in a basket. That's this child." Hope stirred, nudging under his coat. Jed tightened his hold. Amos cleared his throat, voice careful. "Keep reading." Jed forced his eyes back to the page. A new weight settled on his shoulders with every line. She named the father, said he refused her. Her own family cut ties. The only person left willing to accept the child is... He exhaled slow. Her father. A man named Horace Ashford. Ruth blinked. Ashford? As in the ranching empire? That Ashford? Amos nodded once. He's on his way north. Train comes through in 2 days. The operator whistled before catching himself. Ruth shot him a sharp look. Jed didn't react. Not outwardly. But something broke open inside him. A quiet crack, clean and final. So he wants her. He's filing a claim for guardianship, Amos said. Legally, he has a case. Blood ties, wealth, home, resources. The sheriff hesitated. Jed, a court might see that as the better option. Jed's jaw locked. Better for who? Hope whimpered. Jed touched her cheek through the blanket, thumb trembling despite everything he tried to steady. She wouldn't have lasted another hour out there, he said softly. Not one single hour. Ruth stepped beside him, her voice gentle but firm. Then you fight for her. You've already proved you will. Amos set the letter on the desk. There's more. The lawyer says Ashford intends to retrieve the child personally, with all proper authority. That means paperwork, judges, hearings. It won't be simple. Jed stared at the flame in the stove as if it could steady him. Lord, I don't know how to do this. The words rose unbidden, painful, too honest. But I can't lose her. I can't. He drew in a breath that felt colder than the wind outside. What do I need? Documentation, Amos said. Witness statements, proof of care, a timeline of what happened from the minute you found her. Ruth tapped her fingers on the counter. We'll gather every soul who's seen you feed her, warm her, carry her. Anyone who saw you ride in from the storm. Jed shifted hope again. And if it's not enough? It has to be, Ruth said, because the truth is enough. Jed didn't correct her, though part of him knew better. Truth didn't always win. Not out here, not anywhere. But he looked down at the tiny face pressed into his shirt, the flutter of her breath against his ribs, and found something that felt suspiciously like certainty. He nodded. Tell me what comes next. Amos exhaled through his nose. You prepare. Because when that train stops, you're not just fighting Silas Klein anymore. You're fighting a man with more money, more lawyers, and more influence than this whole town combined. Ruth put her hand on Jed's arm. But you've got something he doesn't. What's that? She smiled softly, a tired, knowing thing. A child who clings to you like she already knows her home. Hope made a tiny sound, half sigh, half sleepy protest. Jed touched his forehead to hers, just for a breath. Outside, the wind shifted direction, carrying the whistle of a train far off in the distance. A sound like the future coming, whether he was ready or not. The train came in like a verdict. Iron, smoke, and something colder than the wind rolling off the mountains. Folks along the platform paused mid-conversation as the locomotive hissed to a stop, steam swallowing half the depot in a white cloud. Jed Mercer stood at the far end with hope tucked against his chest, her tiny fist curled into his coat like she didn't trust the world enough to let go. Ruth Hartwell stood close to his shoulder, chin raised, jaw set. Sheriff Amos Rourke kept to Jed's left, boots planted, hat low. They were ready, or as ready as anyone could be. The doors clanged open. A tall man stepped down first, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, wrapped in a long wool coat so fine it looked foreign in this dusty stretch of territory. Horace Ashford. He didn't look around. He didn't take in the town. He didn't blink at the cold. His eyes went straight to the small bundle in Jed's arms. Ruth tensed, just enough for Jed to feel it. Amos didn't move, but the air around him sharpened. Behind Ashford came a lawyer holding a portfolio tight against his chest, and a nurse whose expression held all the judgment she hadn't spoken yet. Wealth had a way of making an entrance without sound. Ashford approached with slow, deliberate steps, boots clicking crisp on the planks. He stopped 3 feet from Jed. "That child," he said quietly. "Is she alive?" Jed pulled Hope closer. "She is." Ashford's jaw flexed once, a movement so small most people wouldn't have noticed. But Jed saw it. Ruth saw it. And something in both of them clocked the truth. This man had been bracing for a corpse. Ashford extended a gloved hand, not to take the baby, but as if asking permission to see her face. Jed didn't move for several seconds. Hope stirred, sensing the shift in air. Finally, Jed eased the blanket back just an inch. Ashford inhaled sharply. The sound cracked through the steam like a snapped branch. "She looks like her mother," he murmured, voice breaking softly at the edges. "Lord help me." Then the moment hardened. Ashford lifted his head, spine straightening. "Mr. Mercer, I am here to reclaim my granddaughter. My lawyers have filed all necessary documents with the territorial court. As her surviving family, no." Jed didn't raise his voice, but the word hit like a stone. Ashford blinked. "No?" Jed stepped half a foot back, instinct more than thought. "She was dying when I found her, alone in the snow. No one else was there. No one else cared. I stayed. I carried her home. I kept her breathing through the night. I don't hand her off like a parcel because a stranger with money arrives on a train." The lawyer cleared his throat, ready to speak, but Amos cut him off with a single look. Ashford studied Jed for a long time, long enough that even the steam seemed to hold still. "I owe you gratitude," he finally said, "more than I can express. But gratitude does not overwrite blood. She is my kin. My daughter's daughter." His voice dipped low. "And I failed my daughter once. I will not fail again." Hope let out a small cry, thin but steady. Ashford flinched, not in fear but in the ache of memory. Jed rocked her gently. Ruth stepped forward, her tone calm but unshakable. "Mr. Ashford, no one here doubts your grief. But this isn't business, And it isn't inheritance. This is a newborn child who recognizes one heartbeat, his. She tipped her head toward Jed. You don't tear that bond apart without a fight. The lawyer finally spoke. There will be a hearing. The judge is prepared to review guardianship under emergency circumstances. Given Mr. Ashford's standing, Amos stepped in, voice low. Given Mr. Mercer reported the child the moment he brought her to town, has cared for her openly, and has half this community as witness. Don't twist the law when it's inconvenient. Ashford turned slightly toward Jed again. You care for her. It wasn't a question. Jed met his gaze. I do. Enough to raise her? Enough to provide for her? Yes. Enough to challenge me in court? Jed's throat tightened, but the answer came from someplace deeper than fear. If that's what it takes. Ashford breathed out slowly, clouds forming in the cold air. He nodded once. Then the court will decide. Until then, I will remain here. His eyes lowered to hope one last time. And I will pray for all our sakes that the truth guides the judgment. He turned to leave, entourage following like a shadow. But before stepping back into the steam, Ashford paused. Without facing them, he said, She was named Evelyn. Evelyn Ashford. Silence hung. Her mother embroidered the initials herself. Jed felt that name hit him like a blow. Evelyn. He didn't speak it aloud. Not yet. Ashford stepped away, swallowed by smoke and steam. Ruth exhaled sharply. He's not the monster Silas painted him as. No, Jed said quietly, but he's still coming for her. Hope made a soft noise, something between a sigh and a question. Jed pressed a kiss to her forehead. Lord, give me strength, he thought, because I'm running out of my own. Amos rested a hand on his shoulder. Time's short. You need witnesses, records, proof of every choice you've made since the moment you found her. Jed nodded, eyes fixed on the place where Ashford had vanished. Because the man who had failed his daughter was ready to fight for his granddaughter. And Jed Mercer, who had failed before, meant not to fail again. Judge Franklin Hale didn't waste breath on ceremony. He never had. His courtroom, really just a converted meeting hall, smelled of old pine and cold iron. The benches creaked with every shift of weight as townsfolk packed themselves tight, drawn by rumor, by concern, or by something uglier. Jed Mercer stood at the front table, hope held snug against his chest beneath Ruth Hartwell's spare shawl. Her small breaths warmed the fabric. Each one felt like a countdown he couldn't see. Across from him, Horace Ashford stood tall, carved of grief and money, and a lifetime of winning battles no one else dared start. His lawyer arranged papers with crisp, confident snaps. Silas Klein sat behind them wearing a smile so thin it could cut. Judge Hale tapped his gavel once. We'll make this brief. Ruth flinched, not at the words, but the tone. Brief meant decided, usually not in favor of the man without land, money, or lawyers. The judge adjusted his spectacles. Mr. Ashford, your petition claims blood right, financial stability, and moral responsibility for your granddaughter Evelyn. Ashford's jaw tightened at the name. Yes, Your Honor. You are prepared to assume guardianship immediately? I am. The judge turned to Jed. Mr. Mercer, you do not contest that you are not related to the child. No, sir, Jed said, voice steady as he could make it. I'm not kin. I'm just the man who found her alive." A murmur rippled through the benches. Judge Hale lifted a hand for silence. "Your statement says the child would have perished had you not intervened." "Yes, sir." "And you've provided care since?" Jed nodded. "Every hour, every breath." Ruth stepped forward. "Your Honor, may I speak?" "You may," Judge Hale said, though he didn't sound thrilled. Ruth stood straighter. "This man kept that baby alive in a storm that nearly killed him. I've watched him feed her, warm her, walk her, stay awake through nights no parent should face alone." Her voice softened, but her spine didn't. "She knows his arms, his heartbeat. That bond matters." Silas Klein rose smoothly. "Your Honor, Mrs. Hartwell is a respected member of this town, but also a woman of soft heart. Emotion cannot outweigh blood and propriety. Mr. Ashford offers not only kinship, but a household suitable for a child, a proper future." Ruth snapped. "A future is not built by money." Silas smiled. "It certainly helped before." Judge Hale tapped the gavel again. "Enough." Jed didn't move, didn't speak, didn't blink. Hope shifted against him with a small, breathy sound. He held her closer. Judge Hale leaned back, weighing something invisible. "Mr. Mercer, what exactly are you asking for today?" Jed swallowed. The truth rose before he could buffer it. "Time." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Time?" "Yes, sir. Time for her to grow strong enough to travel. Time to make sure she has what she needs. Time to find the right answer, not the fast one." Judge Hale studied him for a long moment. Jed felt the weight of every mistake he'd made, every loss he'd carried. Every night he'd buried his face in his hands and begged God for something, anything, to survive him. Then the judge sighed. "Mr. Mercer." A pause. Deadly. Final. "The law does not grant guardianship based on sentiment. Blood relation carries weight in this territory. Financial capacity carries weight. Stability carries weight. You have offered compassion, sir, but compassion alone is not custody." Ruth stiffened. Jed felt the floor tilt under him. Judge Hale continued, voice firm. "Until further notice, the court awards temporary guardianship to Mr. Horace Ashford." The room erupted in whispers. Someone gasped. Someone else swore. Jed didn't hear any of it. He heard only the next sentence. "The child will be transferred to Mr. Ashford's care at dawn tomorrow." Ruth's hand flew to her mouth. Amos muttered, "Judge, that's too soon." "Decision is final." Jed's throat locked. Hope stirred, sensing the violence in the air, giving a tiny cry that sliced through him like a blade. Ashford didn't smile, didn't gloat. His eyes were wet, real grief, real fear, real longing. But longing didn't change the judgment. Judge Hale banged the gavel. Court adjourned. It was over. Except it wasn't. Because Jed couldn't move. His boots felt nailed to the floor. Hope whimpered again, and his arms acted before thought, rocking her, whispering against her hair. "I can't lose her. Lord, I can't do that again." Ruth stepped in front of him. "Jed, breathe." But air wouldn't come. Ashford approached, slow, respectful, carrying his hat low. "Mr. Mercer, I want you to know I don't take this lightly." Jed finally lifted his eyes. "She's still warm because she slept on my chest," he said quietly. "She's still alive because I held her through a storm that nearly killed us both. You may take her at dawn, but don't you pretend she didn't survive in my arms." Ashford's face tightened with something like shame. "I know." Silas Klein stepped up, voice cold. "See? A clean transfer. No trouble, no drama." Amos cut him off with a glare sharp enough to slice rope. "Not another word, Silas." Ashford swallowed, voice hoarse. "Mr. Mercer, if there is anything you wish placed with her, letters, keepsakes, I will see to it that she receives them as she grows." Jed blinked slowly. "I'll have something ready." He turned, walking out of the hall, Ruth and Amos flanking him like guards around a wounded man. The wind cut across the street, carrying ice from the river. Jed clutched Hope tighter, feeling her heartbeat against his ribs. Steady, alive, his. He stepped into the failing afternoon light and thought only one thing, clear and sharp as a brand. If dawn is the deadline, then tonight is all we have left. Night didn't fall so much as collapse. Heavy, black, absolute. Jed Mercer pushed the cabin door shut with his shoulder, locking out the cold like it was a living enemy. Hope whimpered against his chest, half asleep, unaware that the world meant to take her when the sun came up. Ruth Hartwell trailed in behind him, carrying a crate of supplies. Milk, clean cloth, a fresh lantern. Her hands were steady, but her jaw shook once before she clenched it still. "You shouldn't be alone tonight." Jed didn't argue. Couldn't. He set Hope in the crook of his arm and lit the lantern, the yellow glow softening the room that suddenly felt too small to house grief. "I need to write something," he said. His voice scraped. "Something for her, for later." Ruth's breath hitched, but she nodded. "I'll keep the fire going." Jed pulled a chair to the table. The wooden legs creaked under his weight, or maybe under what he carried inside. He laid out a sheet of paper, stared at it. The words wouldn't come. "What do you write to a child you're about to lose twice?" Hope stirred. A single soft cry, barely louder than the wind against the shutters. Jed bent over her, forehead brushing hers. "I'm here, little one." But the reassurance trembled. Ruth placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You write the truth, Jed. That's all God ever asks of us." He nodded, picked up the pencil, wrote slowly. "You were dying when I found you. You saved me by needing me." His hand shook. A drop of something, he refused to call it a tear, hit the page. Outside, the wind rose. Then a knock struck the door. Hard. 3 times. Ruth froze. Jed lifted his head, muscles coiling as if something had hunted him all day and finally caught the scent. "Don't answer," Ruth whispered. But Jed stood. Not reckless. Resigned. He opened the door a sliver. Horace Ashford stood alone on the porch, snow catching in his silver hair, breath fogging in the bitter air. No lawyer, no nurse, no entourage. Just a man, stripped of pride by the kind of grief that spares no one. "I need to speak with you," Ashford said softly. Jed's jaw tightened. "It's late." "Yes," Ashford answered. "And dawn comes sooner than any of us want." He hesitated. "Please." Jed stepped back. Ruth folded her arms. She didn't trust him, but she wasn't sending him into the cold either. Ashford stepped inside, stamping snow from his boots. His eyes went straight to Hope. "She's warm," he murmured. "Thank God." Jed didn't offer him a seat. "Say what you came to say." Ashford removed his gloves with slow, deliberate movements. "My daughter, Evelyn's mother, she wasn't wicked." His voice cracked. "She was frightened, and He swallowed. "I made it worse. I drove her away. I told myself it was discipline, correction, protection of our name." He shook his head. "But it was pride. Godless pride." Ruth's expression softened, but she didn't interrupt. Ashford's eyes glistened. "I pushed her to the edge of the world. When she reached out, I tightened the rope instead of loosening it." His breath shuddered. "By the time I understood, she was gone." Jed listened in silence, the fire snapping quietly behind him. Ashford breathed deep, fighting for control. "I came tonight because I cannot take that child from you with clean conscience. Not without knowing how her mother spent her final hours." Jed's throat tightened. "She died alone. Fever took her fast." Ashford closed his eyes. "I thought so." Hope fussed again, and her small cry cut through the quiet like a blade. Jed lifted her, rocking gently. Ashford watched. Every sway, every instinctive pat, every protective angle of Jed's shoulders. "You love her," Ashford said, voice threadbare. "Yes," Jed answered simply. Wind slammed against the cabin then, so hard the shutters rattled. Ruth hurried to secure them. Snow whirled sideways, a wall of white swallowing the night. "A storm," Ruth muttered. "A bad one." Ashford looked toward the door. "I can't get back to town in this." "You're staying here," Ruth said firmly. Ashford blinked, surprised. Jed wasn't. Ruth had the iron of a frontier woman in her bones. She didn't let storms or men die on her watch. But then Hope's breath hitched. Jed stiffened first. He knew that sound. The too fast, too shallow rhythm. A fever's second wave. Ruth touched Hope's forehead. Her eyes widened. "She's burning up." Jed's pulse roared. Ashford moved so fast, Jed barely registered it. Coat off, sleeves rolled, reaching for cloth. "Where's the basin? I'll help." Jed stared at him. "Why?" Ashford met his gaze, raw and unguarded. "Because one child has already died because of my failures. I will not let another suffer for them." For a moment, just a moment, Jed saw him not as a threat, not as a wealthy enemy, but as a broken father clawing for redemption. "Basin's there," Jed said quietly. Ruth fetched water. Jed stripped Hope down to her undershirt, her tiny chest heaving. Ashford dipped cloth in the cool water, wrung it out, handed it over without a word. Their hands brushed, two men who had every reason to hate each other, now united by the rising heat of one infant's fragile body. Hours blurred. Fire crackled. Wind screamed. Hope whimpered, cried, whimpered again. Ruth fed the stove. Ashford fetched water. Jed held her through every trembling breath. At some point, Ashford's voice broke in a whisper. Not to Jed, not to Ruth, but straight to heaven. Lord, I've wronged much in this life, but spare her. Not her too. Jed didn't look up, but he felt that prayer like a bruise on his ribs. When the fever finally cracked, slowly, mercifully, Hope exhaled a long, shuddering breath and went limp against Jed's chest. Resting, not failing. Ashford sagged into a chair, wiping his eyes, openly. Ruth sank onto the edge of the bed, exhausted. Jed held Hope tight, rocking her gently, whispering the words he hadn't dared write down yet. I'm here. I won't quit on you. Not ever. Ashford watched him, really watched him, and something fundamental shifted behind his eyes. Not defeat, not surrender. Recognition. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse. Mr. Mercer, I will withdraw my petition at dawn. Jed looked up, stunned. You mean, I mean you've already given her what I never could, Ashford said softly. A father's heart. Wind battered the cabin again, but inside something else settled. Quiet as snowfall, sure as grace. Ruth exhaled, shaky with relief. Jed closed his eyes, forehead against Hope's hair, letting the weight lift just enough for breath to return. Outside, the storm raged on. Inside, a new allegiance formed, not in ink or law, but in the shared labor of saving a child in the dark. And when dawn finally came, it would not come with a transfer. It would come with a truce. Dawn came late, crawling over the ridge like it wasn't sure the world deserved light. The storm had died sometime near morning, leaving the town buried under a silence so heavy it felt reverent. Jed Mercer stepped out of the cabin with Hope tucked against him, Ruth Hartwell close behind, and Horace Ashford just a pace to his right. An unlikely trio bound by a night that none of them would ever speak of the same way. Ashford looked older in the pale winter sun. Not weaker, just stripped clean. His fine coat was wrinkled, hair mussed, boots still damp from snowmelt. There was no entourage waiting, no lawyer, no nurse. Just a man who'd fought beside them all night and lost the right to pretend he was anything more than flesh and regret. They reached the courthouse as townsfolk gathered in clumps, whispering. Silas Klein stood near the steps, arms folded, wearing the expression of a man already rehearsing his victory speech. When Ashford approached, Silas straightened, smile poised. Mr. Ashford, I trust we can proceed with the transfer at once. The judge is... Silas, Ashford cut in, voice calm, carved from granite. I'm withdrawing my petition. Silas blinked, sure he'd misheard. Excuse me? I said, Ashford repeated, I am withdrawing my claim for guardianship, effective immediately. A hush rippled through the crowd like a prairie wind reversing direction. Silas's smile faltered. You can't simply... I can, Ashford said. And I have. He turned to Judge Hale, who stood just inside the doorway, taken aback. Your Honor, I request that all proceedings regarding my claim be dismissed. Judge Hale stared at him. Mr. Ashford, this is a significant reversal. Yes. Ashford looked at Jed. Necessary, too. Silas stepped forward, voice tightening. Your Honor, with respect, the welfare of the child... Ashford's gaze snapped to him, colder than the snow still clinging to the windowsills. Silas Klein, you know nothing of that child's welfare. You know only control. I will not let my granddaughter become a pawn in your ambitions. A collective breath left the crowd. Silas flushed dark. This town deserves truth, Ashford said sharply. And the truth is this: Jed Mercer saved my granddaughter's life. He has given her what wealth could not. If the court must name a guardian, let it be the man who has already earned the title. Jed felt something inside him give, not breaking, but loosening, like a knot that had been strangling his chest finally yielded. Hope stirred beneath his coat. He tightened his hold, breath unsteady. Judge Hale adjusted his spectacles, voice softer than before. "Mr. Ashford, are you certain?" "Yes," Ashford said. "I am certain of very little in this world. But this I know." Silas looked around wildly, searching for support. But the crowd had shifted. People who'd whispered doubts hours earlier now watched Jed with new understanding. Ruth stepped closer to him, chin high. Amos Rourke placed himself squarely on Jed's left, stance unmistakably protective. The tide had turned. Silas tried again. "This sets a dangerous precedent," says the man who forged half the danger, Ruth muttered. Ashford lifted a hand. "Your Honor, with your permission, I would like to speak to the townsfolk." Judge Hale nodded. Ashford stepped forward, standing where the morning light hit his face. His voice carried, steady, raw, unvarnished. "I came here believing blood was enough, that because Evelyn was my kin, the law would declare me worthy. But last night, I learned something that broke and mended me in the same breath. Worthiness is not inherited. It is chosen." The crowd leaned in. He gestured toward Jed. "This man chose to save a stranger's child in the middle of a storm, chose to stay, chose to love. That is the only inheritance that matters." Jed swallowed hard. Ashford bowed his head slightly. "I ask this town to stand with him. And if you need my word, take it. Jed Mercer is Hope's father in every way that counts." Silas's jaw clenched so tight the muscle jumped. For a heartbeat, Jed thought the man might explode. Instead, Silas pivoted, masking fury with a taut smile. "Well," he said lightly, "if Mr. Ashford feels so strongly, perhaps we should revisit certain petitions." "Perhaps you should tear them up," Amos said. Ruth added, loud enough for all to hear. "And perhaps apologize to the man you tried to bury with rumors." All eyes turned to Silas. His smile thinned to a blade. "I act for the town's interest." "No," Ashford said dryly. "You act for your own." Silas's mask cracked. He turned abruptly toward the steps, boots clicking sharp, too sharp, on the boards. But everyone heard the fracture in his stride. Because for the first time, Silas Klein wasn't leading the town. He was losing it. Ashford faced Jed once more. "We'll still need to discuss what comes next, but not today. Not with courts. Today is yours." Jed nodded, unable to speak. Hope yawned against him. Small, warm, impossibly alive. Ashford touched the edge of the blanket, reverent. "Take good care of her, Jed Mercer." "I will," Jed whispered. "I already am." People began stepping forward. Soft, murmured apologies, offers of help, quiet confessions that they'd believed Silas too easily. The air felt lighter than it had in days, almost like the storm had blown out more than snow. But Ruth leaned close and murmured, "Don't breathe too easy. Men like Silas don't lose quietly." Jed knew she was right. He felt it in the shift of the wind, in the lingering taste of ash beneath the relief. He kissed Hope's forehead. For this moment, victory belonged to them. But the fight wasn't finished. Not even close. The thaw lasted less than 2 days. On the third morning, a stranger rode into town, coat gray, expression grayer, boots too clean for this side of the territory. He dismounted in front of the sheriff's office, tied his horse with methodical precision, and walked inside without introducing himself. Jed Mercer felt the shift before he saw the man. The air changed, conversations thinned. Even Hope, cradled in his arms as he crossed the boardwalk toward Ruth Hartwell's store, let out a soft, uneasy whimper. Amos Rourke stepped out of his office. "Jed," he called, voice low, "we've got company." Jed followed him inside. The stranger stood at the center of the room, coat unbuttoned, notebook already open. His hair was neatly parted, his jaw sharp, his demeanor sharpened further. He glanced up as they entered. "Mr. Mercer," he said, in a tone that carried neither malice nor mercy, only procedure. "My name is Gideon Calloway, investigator for the Territorial Governor's Office." Ruth froze in the doorway behind them. Amos narrowed his eyes. Jed adjusted Hope automatically, protective even before his mind caught up. Calloway clicked his pen. "We received several complaints regarding the welfare and legal status of a newborn child currently in your care." Silas Klein. The name didn't need speaking. It hung in the air like smoke. Jed kept his voice steady. "She isn't in danger." "That is what I'm here to determine," Calloway replied. "Not by rumor, by fact." He gestured to a chair. Jed didn't sit. "Very well," Calloway said. "This will be brief." But nothing brief ever ended well. He opened his notebook. "First, you are not a relative of the infant. No. Second, the biological family exists but relinquished their claim." "Her grandfather withdrew his petition," Jed said. "Voluntarily." Calloway made a non-committal sound, writing something down. "Third, you have no spouse, no legal partner, no established household structure for raising a newborn." Ruth bristled. "He has a home. He has the town behind him. He has—" Calloway raised a hand. "Mrs. Hartwell, please. I'm not questioning your support. Only the framework. A newborn requires stability, maternal support, balanced caretaking." Jed stiffened. "She has what she needs." Calloway looked directly at him then, not cruel but impenetrable. "Need is not the standard, Mr. Mercer. Compliance is." Silas's fingerprints were all over that sentence. Calloway continued, voice even. "Given the unusual circumstances of the child's discovery and the contested claims that followed, the governor's office requires one of two outcomes within a set time frame to avoid transferring the child to territorial care." Hope fussed at the rise in Jed's heartbeat. He rocked her gently, but his own breath shortened. "What time frame?" he asked. 3 months? Ruth inhaled sharply. 3? 3 months, Calloway repeated, unbothered by the outrage. "At the end of which your household must meet all qualifiers for infant guardianship." Jed felt something cold crawl beneath his ribs. "Which qualifiers?" Calloway flipped to another page. "Stable housing, reliable income, proper documentation, witness statements, Medical records. He paused. And a mother in the home. The room dropped into silence so complete it hurt. Ruth's hand flew to her mouth. Amos swore under his breath, a rare crack in his restraint. Jed said nothing, because for one blind second he couldn't breathe. Hope let out a soft cry. Calloway continued, tone unchanged. If these requirements are not met, the infant will be removed for placement in a certified household that meets territorial standards. This is not punitive. It is procedural. Jed finally found his voice, raw and scraped thin. You're saying the only way I keep her is if I'm married, or have a woman legally residing in your household who assumes the role of mother? Yes. That's not how families work, Ruth snapped. That, Calloway replied calmly, is how the law works. Jed rocked Hope, more for his own balance than hers. His pulse thundered in his ears. The fire crackled. Snow tapped against the window. 3 months. Marriage, or lose her. Ruth stepped to Jed's side, eyes burning. You don't get to take that child from him because he doesn't fit your tidy boxes. Calloway regarded her with something almost respectful. Ma'am, I don't take pleasure in this. I enforce the standard. If you believe it unjust, petition the legislature. Until then, compliance is required. Amos stepped forward. Jed filed every report. He followed every step of the law. He's done nothing wrong. Not doing wrong, Calloway said, closing his notebook, is not the same as meeting the requirements. He walked toward the door, pausing only long enough to deliver the final blow. At the end of the 3 months, Mr. Mercer, either you present a household with a mother. His eyes flicked to Hope, softening a fraction. Or I take the child. He stepped outside, letting the door swing shut behind him with a thud that felt like a gunshot. No one moved. Ruth's breath shook. Jed, I'm so sorry. Jed stared at the knot in the wood floor, unable to lift his head, unable to speak past the weight inside him. Hope whimpered, sensing the fear that thickened the air. Jed gathered her close, pressing his cheek to her soft hair. Lord, he thought, the prayer clawing upward, unsteady, broken. You gave her to me. Don't let them take her away. But the silence that followed wasn't comfort. It was warning. 3 months. A mother in the home. Or nothing. Jed Mercer didn't go home. Not at first. He walked. Past the boarding house, past the smithy, past the church where snow had gathered on the steps like folded hands. Hope slept against his chest, small breaths tapping warmth into his coat. Each step felt like walking into water, heavy, slow, stealing breath. 3 months. A mother in the home. Or lose her. Ruth Hartwell finally caught up to him on the road leading toward the ridge. Jed, she called, breath forming clouds in the sharp evening air. Stop! He didn't. Not until Hope stirred and whimpered at the jostle. Only then did he halt, jaw clenched so hard he tasted iron. Ruth stepped in front of him, gripping her shawl tight. Tell me what you're thinking. That I'm out of time, he said. His voice barely made it past the rawness in his throat. Calloway's not bluffing. Silas will feed him every lie he needs. And Hope, his words fractured. Hope can't survive another fight like this. Not after everything. Ruth breathed out slow. Then we make sure she doesn't have to. Jed shook his head. I can't ask you for that. You're not asking, Ruth said simply. I'm offering. He froze. Her voice didn't tremble. It didn't try to dress itself in poetry. Ruth never used more words than she needed. Marry me, Jed. The world narrowed. The ridge. The cold. Hope's soft breath. Ruth's steady eyes. Winter clear. Jed swallowed. You deserve a man who isn't broken. I'm not asking for perfect, she said. Just honest. I don't want you tied to me out of pity. This isn't pity. He opened his mouth, but Ruth stepped closer, closing the distance with the surety of someone who had already made her peace with the cost. Listen to me. Every child deserves 2 arms to hold her, 2 voices to calm her, 2 people who stay when the storm gets loud. She glanced at Hope, her expression softening. You love her, Jed. I do too. That has to mean something. Jed breathed hard, chest tight. I can't give you more than I have. I don't even know what I am anymore. Ruth smiled, small, tired, and painfully real. Then we build from there. Hope woke with a soft cry. Ruth reached out, touched her cheek, and the baby quieted instantly. Jed felt something shift inside him. Fear, yes, but also recognition. A truth he couldn't outrun. She wasn't offering rescue. She was offering partnership. Jed tightened his hold on Hope. If we do this, he said quietly, it has to be because we choose it, not because the law demands it. Ruth nodded. Then choose it, Jed. The wind picked up, scattering snow across the road like scattered prayers. Jed let out one long, shaking breath. All right, he whispered. We choose it. Hope settled between them, warm and impossibly small. And for the first time since Calloway's verdict, the future didn't feel like a gallows. It felt like a door. The wedding happened in less than an hour. No music, no flowers, just necessity wrapped in a winter coat. Jed Mercer stood beside Ruth Hartwell in the small church, Hope asleep in his arms, like she'd decided the world was finally steady enough to rest. Amos Rourke signed the ledger as witness. Horace Ashford bowed his head through the vows, hands clasped like a man praying his past wouldn't poison anyone's future. When the preacher said husband and wife, Ruth let out a breath she'd held for days. Jed glanced at Hope, then Ruth, and felt something settle inside him. Not peace exactly, but belonging. Then everyone got to work. By afternoon, the cabin sounded like a forge. Hammers, saws, boots crossing the porch. Ruth directed neighbors as if she'd run the town her whole life, setting up a sleeping corner for Hope, stitching new curtains, clearing space for Calloway's inspection. Jed hauled lumber with Ashford, both men working without speaking, sweat freezing on their sleeves. At dusk, smoke rose in the distance. Amos saw it first. Jed, that's your line shack. Jed handed Hope to Ruth and ran. Snow broke under his boots. Amos kept pace. The barn was blazing, flames licking the rafters. Jed tore the doors open, dragging feed and tools clear. Amos shoveled snow along the base, shouting for help. When townsfolk arrived with buckets, the fire finally began to die. But the truth was already visible. Amos knelt by the tracks. Kerosene. Boot prints heading toward town. His voice hardened. Silas, no doubt. Jed stared at the smoking wreckage, chest tight. He wants hope gone. Bad enough to burn me out. Then we use what he gave us, Amos said. Proof. They returned to the cabin, soot-streaked, freezing, exhausted, to find Gideon Calloway waiting on the porch. Jed braced for another blade, another rule, another impossible standard. Instead, Calloway closed his notebook. Mr. Mercer, your home was inspected earlier today. Adequate provisions, safe shelter, balanced caretaking. And with Mrs. Mercer here, he nodded to Ruth, your household now meets all territorial requirements. Ruth gasped. Jed's knees nearly buckled. Calloway softened, barely. The child stays with you, permanently, and Sheriff Rourke will provide a statement about the arson attempt. Hope woke then, blinking up at the three of them, father, mother, and the lawman who'd become their shield. Jed lifted her close. Ruth laid a hand over both of them. Outside, the night wind changed direction, cold, but carrying something new. Not threat. A beginning.